Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Cara Lynn, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. 10 years ago, the founders of Viori Hair and Body Care met the Red Yao tribe in the Longshan Mountains of southern China. The women of the tribe are famous for their incredibly thick, long, youthful hair. They wash it only with a special blend of Longshan rice water and other simple ingredients. They shared their recipe with Viori, so Viori can share it with you in hair care shampoo and conditioner bars that give you soft, healthy, shiny hair, while helping to preserve the Red Yao culture and economy. All Viori products are vegan, sulfate-free, paraben-free, cruelty-free, and plastic-free, and they're all made with Longshan rice from Red Yao farmers. Viori gives a portion of their profits to the Red Yao people so this tribe and its traditions will survive and thrive. That's Viori's beautiful reason. Learn more and shop Viori products at viori.com and use code JUSTINGREDIENTS for 10% off. Lillie Biesinger is a busy mom of four with a passion for good food, especially when it comes to counting macros. Lillie's macro counting journey started in November 2016 as she started tracking with a coach, learning all the ins and outs of tracking. Lillie teaches the importance of eating delicious, real, whole foods and eating lots of them. Lillie has gained a large following on her Instagram at Lillie Eats and Tells, formerly at Lillie Loves Macros, where she shares amazing macro-friendly recipes, tips and tricks, advice, and empowerment to everyone on their food journey, macro counting or not. With 3 macro-friendly cookbooks filled with delicious, easy-to-make meals, Lillie is a great resource whether you are new to the macro world or already tracking. Everyone, I am so excited to have Lillie here on the podcast. A lot of you know her from Instagram, and I am so excited to talk macros with you and just a bunch of food things. So thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. I'm so honored that you have me.
Lillie, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, how you became interested in the health and fitness industry and tracking macros.
Well, I always wonder like how far back to go, but I would say I've always been at least thought that I was interested and aware of health and wellness. Just growing up, my parents were to whatever degree, it's always changing. But I grew up with my dad when I was young, ran health clubs, gyms. And my mom was actually, I think she did like her undergrad, like her associate's degree in nutrition or something. So she was always aware. And I would say we ate healthy-ish. But then just fast forward like to my adult years, being married, I like to cook. But it was after my third baby, I have 4. After my third, I had a friend. So it was just kind of normal where I felt pretty good, but I would always kind of like, oh, I think it's time to tighten things up. Maybe I should try South Beach, or I never did Atkins, but I definitely dabbled in like, oh, I think I should try something new, and I always felt like, oh, it's time to go back to just eating veggies and protein so I could like try and lose the baby weight or whatever. So at some point in there, one of my friends started counting macros, and I'd seen the term before, and it was just sort of this foreign term, like this language of bodybuilders or something I didn't understand all, and was not interested at all until she just had such a great experience. So I was curious and ended up hiring Amber, Biceps After Babies, to coach me, which I'd never done anything like that. It was so out of my comfort zone, like to spend money on something like that. I'd always felt like, why would I spend money? We all know what we have to do. We just don't want to do it,
Right.
Like, I know I should exercise. I know I should lift some weights. I know I should eat lots of veggies and protein. That's what I always just thought was the solution. But I think I just really fell in love quickly because it felt like the first time for me where it was a different approach. It wasn't like emotional, and it made it kind of like a math equation, which I liked. I liked things like objective and kind of like a science experiment. And I felt like it was like a new approach that didn't feel like sad or emotional to me. Like I was taking all these things away. It felt more like I was trying to figure out this new puzzle, and I had success. So then I just got really, really into it. And here we are.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I'm going to start at the very beginning, this very basic, so that anyone listening can follow along throughout the whole podcast episode. So let's just start with the basics. What are macros, and what does it mean to track your macros?
So macros is just short for macronutrients, which are your carbs, fats, and protein. So tracking your macros just means that you're keeping track of your daily intake of those three macronutrients. Of course, there are other things that come along with those, but things that you're taking care of, tracking, monitoring, if you're tracking your macros for sure. And obviously, it's like counting your calories. I mean, you could track your macros and you could track them up to 1,000,000 and you would eat a lot of food. Tracking the macros themselves doesn't do anything magical, right? But you set goals, maybe with the help of a coach, maybe on your own, to try and figure out this balance of macronutrients that's going to make you feel the best and help you hit whatever your goals are.
So when you track macros, you're tracking your fats, your carbs, and your protein that you have eaten that day.
Correct. In grams.
Okay, so how does someone figure out what their macros should be? Because everybody has different macros, correct?
Yeah, although I will say people get really hung up on that. Like it's like this, like you need to go to like a fortune teller. Like we've got this perfect macro breakdown and it's going to be different for everybody. I mean, the truth is it's not that magical. It's all comes back to your biofeedback and trial and error to some degree. The main key, I would say, and I even need to preface this though, because you can count your macros and do keto. You could count your macros and be vegan. And if you are, your protein count, your goal for protein, you have to be realistic. You have to factor it into all of your different goals in life. So your protein goal is going to be much lower than a traditional macro counter. If you're tracking your macros and you're doing keto, you're going to be shooting for really high fat, moderate protein, and really low carb, but your traditional kind of, at least in my opinion, what I'm going to call like your mainstream macro counter, like right now, is we're generally going to have a low fat, high protein, moderate carb breakdown.
Okay.
And you can go to a lot of different online calculators to figure that out, or you can use a coach. And yeah, people freak out because you could go to a few different online calculators and get different numbers.
Right.
And, that's just because there's a lot of things to factor in and which is why a coach can be nice, because if you find somebody you trust, then you just feel like you tell me what to do. I've got a page in my first cookbook that kind of breaks down how I do it, how I would do it. I don't coach people, and I also have that published on my blog. So if that's helpful for anybody.
So if someone is just starting to track macros, do they need a coach or can they do it on their own?
I just think it totally depends on your personality. And if you benefit from having like someone to be accountable to. But also I do think there's a huge learning curve. And when you have success, it's so much easier to keep going,
Right.
when you have that reward. So I do think in the beginning, it can be really beneficial to have somebody that you can ask questions to and somebody that you are reporting to, because it might just keep you more really on track. Because then if it's going to work and you see the results and you feel great, then it's so much easier to sustain after that. I don't think you need a coach for very long. And I definitely think you can figure out, if you're the kind that just is so likes to do things on your own, there's so much information out there. You can do it on your own. But it's like anything, a coach helps.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
So if someone is just starting to track macros, can they eat whatever foods they want as long as it fits in the macros, or do you suggest certain foods?
Okay, that's like the money question. I feel like that's why I started my page, because when I first got into macros and I was like looking up all these different pages on Instagram. I mean, Instagram before that for me had just been friends, like it was for all of us in the beginning. So that was my first exposure to like searching for people that weren't my actual real life friends to try to find new ideas for food. And it was so disappointing because it was still, I feel like, just owned by like the men macro account.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's how I felt. Maybe I'm wrong. And just so many like macro friendly stacks of pancakes with protein powder and Pop-Tarts. Like it felt like there was this obsession with proving we can eat whatever we want and still count our macros. Like even the lowest of the low, like that's what I'm thinking is I haven't eaten a Pop-Tart since like I was a kid at a friend's house anyway. Like why would I start now trying to incorporate these Pop-Tarts that maybe have like protein powder snuck into them? It was like very gross. So for me, It's like, obviously I'd always cared about good whole foods for the most part. I still wanted to eat like that, but I also wanted to be able to incorporate this new macro counting thing that I learned, because I did have a greater and quicker
Result.
results than I'd had previously with other things. So I guess my answer is, it's like asking somebody, can you count your calories and eat whatever you want? Or do you have to eat a certain diet? Like, of course you can eat whatever you want, because that's up to you. You know, it's not managing every part of your life. Counting your macros just means you're keeping this data of your intake of your carbs, fat, and protein, so you can see what it does to your body. And if you want to raise certain things, lower certain things, depending on your goals. So it just gives you this tool to manipulate your diet for your goals.
Yeah. So that's like eating 1,400 calories of Oreos or 1,400 calories of protein and vegetables and fruits. I mean, it's sort of the same idea that macro counting, you want to, of course, eat the whole foods and good foods, not all macros of Oreos.
Yes. And I would say, yeah, that technically you can hit your same macros eating some questionable foods. You could eat just like a bunch of chicken to hit your protein, and then you could fill all your carbs and fat with Oreos if you wanted. Now, like, will your results be the same? I don't think so. But, you know, again, nobody's in charge of you. So you're going to decide and see how you feel and all that. Right.
Right. Okay. So talking about whole foods, this one I'm really curious about, because on macros, people try to keep their fat low. And I teach that you need healthy fats just for your hormones and your mental health and your brain, things like that. So do macro counters always go for the low fat options at the store, or do you ever use the whole fat options?
I know that's a good question. When you're counting your macros, you should not always be cutting. When you're cutting, your numbers are low because your goal is to shed fat. So that's not supposed to be the lifestyle, though. That's supposed to be a phase, a short phase to achieve your goal. And then you should reverse up, which I will probably talk about afterwards. You should reverse those calories up. And then you should be eating at like a maintenance level. When you're eating at that maintenance level, all of those macros are going to be higher. Your fat is what you're going to increase. You are not going to increase protein. Your protein stays the same. In fact, you especially want high protein while you're cutting to maintain your muscle so you don't lose muscle when you're losing weight. When you increase, that protein is actually a little less important when you're just eating enough food for your body to maintain. And then I think your fat is plenty high to incorporate, like plenty of good fats. From what, I mean, I've done like at least a little bit of research. I'm not an expert in this. I definitely don't claim to be on that end of things. But there was a phase where I was like, am I eating enough fat? So anyway, everything I did, the research, like the heart healthy amount of fat at maintenance, when you're eating like 70 to 80 grams of fat, from what I read, that was great. I think it also comforted me when I see the whole plant-based world that they also avoid excess fats. Like we see olive oil as like a really healthy thing. And I've learned like the plant-based world doesn't use olive oil because it's processed. It's just a pure fat. So I think when you're tracking your macros, you're counting it all. So obviously you should try to get your fats from good sources, but you just would be making sure you're getting enough fat. You know, something else I wanted to say about the low fat though. There's one thing that's important to me, because I feel like if you go in blindly and you're like, low fat's always better, then no, there is so much garbage at the store where they just replace the fat with garbage, with sugar to make it taste good. But so sometimes I do think that that's the criticism, but that's not always the case. So for me, I'm really just going to go low fat when it's dairy and they're just taking out some fat, like low fat milk, and you end up with a higher protein content. Again, I don't claim to be an expert, so I'm sure I believe there's still like some benefits to the whole egg and the whole milk and stuff for my kids all the way. But if I have a goal, it's all about priorities to me at the time. Right.
Well, and you can find better low fat options compared to other low fat options. Some low fat options, I will tell you, are terrible. Like I look at the ingredients and I'm like, it is 12 chemicals and no food. Like where are the food ingredients? It's just artificially made. So of course I always teach whole food. And if I were doing macros, I would do whole fat, but just not eat so much of it. Right. That's another way to do it. So I could have my whole fat cottage cheese, but I'm just not going to eat as much of it. I can have my whole fat milk. I just don't need to drink a full cup of it. You know, things like
and
that.
That's exactly the catch. That's where you have to prioritize. So for those who are like, that sounds really wonderful in theory, but I know myself and I'm still hungry. So instead I had 2 cups of milk because I deserve it. I'm hungry and whole fat's better. That's great for all those health reasons. Like, I guess macro counting would just tell you, you have to be okay with all the results. So if you're eating an excess of calories because that's important to you, but you also don't have the restraint of Carlin to only have a half portion,
Right.
then you just have to know. That's what I love about macro counting. It's just the data so that you can figure out what the results are, and then you decide what your priorities are, you know?
Do you think some people put their fat too low though? Their
Yes.
fat numbers, I should say.
Yes, absolutely. If it lasts too long, especially. I think that if your fat is low, it should be very short.
I agree because women actually need healthy fats, especially for their hormones. We
Mm-hmm.
actually need those fats to create a lot of our hormones. And so sometimes if people are having hormonal issues, I'm like, let's look at your fats. Don't cut
Right.
them, too small.
So like for me, I've had some like concerns with that just in my own head. So for me, what I do when I feel like that is I completely change my macro balance. Having said that, I haven't tracked diligently in like a really long time. So it's not like necessarily what I'm doing, but I'm still always in my head aware of that breakdown. So if I'm increasing my fats, I'm just naturally lowering my carbs. I'm not so worried about if I'm going to eat whole fat cottage cheese, I'm only going to eat a little bit. It's more like if I'm going to increase my fats and make the goal over 100 and a lot of my calories are going to come from there, I'm just going to look at my calories and naturally I'm going to drastically reduce my carbohydrate intake during that time so that my calories are still where I want them, whether I want to maintain or lose, etc.
Right.
That makes
Well, and
sense.
don't you think it differs a little bit for people of how they feel? Because I know, for instance, I feel better with more fats, whereas my
Mm-hmm.
sister does not because she doesn't digest them well. And so she has a lower
Totally.
fat number than I do. So I think it's
Yes.
individual as well. Like you can look at the calculators, but working with a coach and figuring out for yourself really how your body feels the best, I think is important too.
Exactly. Which is why I say, yeah, those calculators, it's all just a starting point. But really, all that matters is your biofeedback, how you feel. And that's what I like about it is once you're doing something, it gives you a starting point to like manipulate the numbers from there to figure out what really does feel good for you. And that's all that matters.
Right. Okay, so you were talking about cutting, maintaining, reverse. Explain to brand new macro counter what those terms mean and where you start. Do you start at maintenance or do you start at cutting?
Just depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to shed fat, like we hate the word diet, it has such a terrible connotation, but I'm super practical and it's hard for me to get behind like using so many careful words. So to me, it's like if you're trying to lose weight or shed fat, you're dieting. You're going to be eating in a deficit, in a caloric deficit. That's priority number one. So the whole setting your numbers thing, it's going to start with just figuring out what you're eating right now. And if you're just kind of staying the same weight, there's a good chance you're eating in your maintenance range. And so if you want to shed fat and you're counting macros, you're going to set those calories a little bit lower. So you're in a caloric deficit and then figure out your macros that fit those calories. If you want to count your macros because you're happy where you're at, but you want to build muscle, then that's different. You're just going to start them at maintenance, or you're even going to start them in a bulk where you're intentionally eating more than you burn so that you can put on muscle while you're lifting heavy weights, you know? So it just totally depends on your goals.
So, what is a cut and what's a reverse?
So a cut is a diet. It's when you want to shed fat. So
Okay.
that's when you're going to put your calories in a deficit. A reverse is after you've dieted for a chunk of time because your goal was to shed fat. You don't want to stay there forever because your body adapts. This is like the sad thing that we see that so many people struggle with is they get stuck in this cycle of dieting because they just always want to be a little bit thinner or whatever. So that's where you can get trapped. If you're cutting, if you see macros as just something to like do to lose fat, and then you just stay there because you're so afraid to put back on any weight, well then yeah, your body just gets used to that. You can't just keep losing. We would all just disintegrate, you know? So obviously your body adapts to that new lower caloric intake. And now that's what you use to just maintain. You're not going to keep losing. Then you're afraid to increase when in reality, maybe you cut at 1600 calories. You can probably maintain that same weight, even the weight you got to, maybe plus a little bit, eating 2000 to 2400 calories. So the reverse is the process of increasing your calories to then eat a good, healthy amount of calories every day to maintain your weight. And that's when, that's how you're going to make sure you're not messing with your hormones and all these other things. Is you should be spending most of your time at maintenance and then just using maybe short stints to cut when and if you have body fat you want to lose.
So how does someone know how to reverse? Like, how do they know how many calories to go up to or how to change their macros?
That's another thing that like is kind of overcomplicated and I don't think it needs to be. So when I first did it, I was with Amber. So my experience was so positive. It's not as simple for me now. So I feel like I can identify with all the people. But for me in the beginning, it was like I did this like 3 to 4 week cut. And then I was happy and was like, I don't want to lose a bunch of weight. I just wanted to like feel good. I feel good now. What do I do now? And so then she, as my coach, gave me, I think, an additional, every week I was supposed to eat 100 more calories per day. So you increase that 1,600 a day to 1,700 a day for a week. And as I watched my biofeedback and I still felt really good, the next week we increased more and more and more. And all of that by way of carbs and fat, because my protein was already plenty high. So then you're just increasing to get to a healthy fat range and lots of carbs. So then you can kind of play with it and decide what's more important to you. If you like to eat a lot of carbs, like how you and your sister feel different. If you prefer a higher fat diet or a higher carb diet, those can kind of fall where they do. But I feel like what I was going to say is what's overcomplicated is because people are so afraid to like watch the scale go up or gain weight. I think the instinct is to increase really slowly, when in reality, you could jump up probably 300 to 400 calories right away. And you might see a little bit of increase on the scale because you've got more food in your system. You're eating more carbohydrates, so your cells are holding more water, all those things. But you're not going to just like gain a bunch of fat. And then you can kind of go from there and increase a little bit more. And you're sort of testing trial and error, seeing like, okay, this is where I started to see the scale tip up and I'm feeling a little bit less comfortable. Maybe I'll like hold right here or go down a little bit and hold right there.
Okay. So if you're tracking macros, are there other food groups that you look at like sugars, artificial sweeteners, or it's just purely you guys are going to look at the fat, protein, and carbs?
That's just back to kind of the same thing I said before, where it's just up to you. Again, saying like, if you do keto, can you eat this kind of oil or only this kind of oil? You know, you decide how pure, how clean, how you want your body to feel. So the counting of the macros is just what it is. It is the counting of the macros.
Okay.
Those 3 macronutrients. You decide like how good you want to feel and how much you want your gut to work properly and all that, you know.
So let's talk artificial sweeteners, because I know on your Instagram, you've talked about them recently and you've cut them out. They weren't making your stomach feel good?
Yeah. And I mean, full transparency, I'm so far from perfect. I'm like afraid to say this on your show. You can edit it out if it's offensive. I do still drink Diet Coke.
No, not offensive.
For me, it's like, I want to know when I'm choosing the thing that is not benefiting my health, you know? So if I want to have a Diet Coke in the afternoon, I'm having a Diet Coke. I'm certainly not pretending that it's helping me toward my health goals. What I don't want is sucralose snuck into all of my protein powders and my green drinks and all these things that I thought were helping me in the beginning, you know?
Right.
So yes, for me, it was completely from you, Carlin. I still, when people ask me about that, I'm very like, I'm not an expert. Go look at Carlin's page. I just know what she's told me on Instagram. Nice. She doesn't know she's told me, and I know that I didn't feel good when I was consuming a lot of sucralose. And even still, I don't feel like I was doing tons, but yeah, I think there's definitely a danger when you start counting your macros, especially if you're following all these influencers who are eating a lot of this stuff. There's a danger that suddenly you're like filling your pantry with these things you never even would have bought before. And you're working them into your diet, like this sugar-free syrup. And I am really embarrassed that it's like, I've got this one sugar-free syrup that's still mentioned once or twice in my first cookbook. And I don't feel like I can take it out. You know, it's all out there. It's not like a main ingredient, it's a drizzle, but I definitely wouldn't like purchase that now.
Well, I love that you talk about it. And here's why, because so much of the low fat, the low calorie things out there have artificial sweeteners in it. And I think people are fine if they have just like a Diet Coke during the day, like they won't feel it in their stomach. But what happens, I think, to a lot of people is they're having artificial sweeteners for breakfast and they don't know it. It's in the syrup or in the protein powder. And then they have it in for a snack in their protein bar or something. And then they have it at lunch, in the salad dressing. And then
Mm-hmm.
our guts are just full of artificial sweeteners, way more than we thought. And so
Right.
then that just starts destroying the good bacteria in the gut. And then that causes the upset stomach, and destroying
Right.
the good bacteria in the gut can lead to so many other issues. So I
Right.
appreciate that you do macros and talk about artificial sweeteners, because I think it's important for people just to be aware and
Mm-hmm.
understand what they can do. And then they can make the choice. Do I want it in my food or do I not? Like you said, you make a conscious decision. Like, yeah,
Right.
I'm going to enjoy my Diet Coke, but you've made sure it's out of your protein powder and other things. So I appreciate
Right.
how you do it.
Thank you.
Okay, another question about macros, and I've always wondered this one. So if you are off on your macros one day, do you lower them the next day to make up for that bad day, or you just move on?
Personally, I would just definitely just move on. But again, just depends on your goals. So I'm often going to use this analogy of like a budget. I feel like macro counting is very much like a financial budget. And you could say, like, you know what? I deserve this. I deserve to buy this thing. It makes me feel really happy today. But you're the only one. Like, if me and my husband were saving for our next house, and I knew I had to save like $200 a day, and that was going to help us reach our goal in exactly this many months. Well, if one day I decide, like, you know what? I deserve this new pair of shoes. Like, I've worked really hard. I'm going to buy it. That's great, right? I think he would support me. I think he'd be fine with it. But I don't think I can do that and then just expect everything to still just end right where it was supposed to end. I have to know the results of that. So that's the only thing is I feel like sometimes I think there's such a push against diet culture and there's such a push for like self-love. I hope this doesn't come out wrong. All of that is so important, obviously. But like I said, I'm very practical. So to me, it's like, okay, but I just want to know what the result's going to be. I'm the only one that has to deal with the results on my body. So yeah, if I had a goal and it was very important to me to hit that aesthetic goal or health goal because my weight was at like an unhealthy weight and it was affecting my life or something, then it might be a priority to like rein things in even more the next day to try to balance it out. I think for most of us, absolutely not. I think when it actually comes to macros and day to day and your mental health, so it's sustainable, no. I think mostly you just move on the next day and you just try to like every day is a new day.
Okay, you're just talking about mental health and mindset. So let's talk about the mindset in counting macros, because in the diet world, macros sometimes gets a negative feeling, negative perception. So is it right for everybody, and why does it get that negative perception?
I definitely don't think it's right for everybody. I definitely don't think it's like a foolproof thing. I think with anything that's even remotely connected with dieting, if you have any kind of like eating disordered past, you probably should stay far away. Every once in a while, I get a message on my page from somebody that struggles with that. My main message is probably like, you probably shouldn't be following my page because it's going to be about counting macros. And I think if you have an obsessive history or, where it's affected you, then no, it's more important. Again, it's all about priorities. And it's way more important that you have health and balance and mental health than it is that you're able to shed 5 pounds or whatever. So much more important. I wish we could all cater to everybody. I don't feel like, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but if I'm struggling with like spending too much money, I might have to unfollow a lot of like beautiful design accounts because I want to buy a lot of things for my home.
Right.
But I don't think that makes them bad for putting it out there.
That's a good analogy. So, question for you then, because I know some people that are really obsessive with their macro counting to the
Mm-hmm.
point that, like, when we go out to lunch, they're weighing their spinach that they're putting in their salad. And so, what do you say to people that are obsessive like that?
I mean, it's hard for me to understand just because of where I'm at now. I can't imagine doing that. But having said that, when I first started counting macros, I did like travel, like when we would go to like an Airbnb, I would bring my scale. And I have daughters, I have kids. I know that's going to be a question. And I actually feel I'm happy to answer that one because I don't feel like it's an issue, but it can be for sure. And I just think, gosh, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a mental health doctor, so I don't know what you teach somebody about that. But I think that's probably a phase and hopefully they get through it quickly because no, I do not think that should be a lifestyle to be that obsessive.
So macro counting should not be obsessive. It's just a way to
Oh,
educate
absolutely not.
yourself as to how
Yes.
you feel when you eat foods.
Yes. The short answer is that macro counting should be a tool that teaches you what's in your food, what it looks like on your plate, portion sizes and whatnot, how you feel when you eat that. And I think the scale can be super powerful in the beginning when you thought you knew portion sizes, but you didn't really. And it can really help you understand, like, okay, different foods, it can vary a lot. If you're eating one kind of protein versus another, the same portion might feel very different in your stomach. So I think it can be really helpful to learn those portion sizes and then spread your wings and like feel kind of free of that.
Right. I love that because it is important for people to learn what a portion size is and what that looks like and how to eat that because our portion sizes in America are huge.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I would say to those that are listening, if they are obsessive with their macro counting, maybe they should reevaluate and really look inside themselves and ask if this is the best lifestyle for them. Maybe there's a better option for them out there.
Right. Maybe their personality is just a little bit too tight on that.
Okay, you were just talking about your daughters. So, do you suggest that teenagers count macros? And how do you teach your daughters that this is a positive thing, not a negative way of life?
Yeah. I would never have my daughters count macros. And I mean, like a lot of things, I guess when they're adults, they could decide if that was like something that helped them. But I'm actually, I mean, I think that from what they've seen, it's just been totally a positive thing. I'll start from the beginning because I totally understand the concern and the perception. And when I first started counting macros, it was 4 years ago, and I was very diligent and I was wanting to weigh everything because it was like this science experiment. And I promised myself, like, I would never let my kids see me weigh my food. So I was really strategic. It was 4 years ago, so they were a little younger. My oldest was 12. My other daughter was like 9. And for a long time, I felt like they had no idea. But eventually, I realized, okay, this isn't realistic for me to continue using the scale like this and not think that they'll catch on. So then I just made a really obvious effort to focus on the positive. And it was always like figured out I love to lift weights, I'm feeling stronger, and I want to make sure I'm getting enough protein for my muscles because I'm doing all this research and you need plenty of protein for your muscles and you need plenty of fat for your brain and your hormones. And, you know, the more carbohydrates I have, the more energy I have, and I want to run tomorrow. So everything was just with that angle. It was just like, I'm weighing this to make sure I'm getting enough protein for this, all this research I've been doing. I don't even feel like it ever crossed their mind that the scale was related to like some kind of depriving or, I mean, because before that, yeah, I was always like, my kids will never hear the word, like the F word, FAT. They will never hear that I'm trying to lose weight. I was like so set on all this. And now I'm loving this macro counting thing and thinking like, oh my gosh, I cannot let my kids think I'm, you know. Right. So anyway, luckily, as they've gotten older too, my goals have changed so much. And I mean, it's my business. So obviously I'm building meals on the scale all the time, but they're just so aware of what it is to me. And it's to calculate. So we know what's in this food. Nothing is off limits in my house. That's what I'm always telling myself too, is all the families out there that had moms who like are not eating bread, not eating carbs, trying a new diet, you know, and I feel really grateful that once I found macros, I have never tried some random diet. It's always just knowing what's in all of our food. There's every food group is always around. There's so many fruits and vegetables. There's always carbs. There's always fats, you know, there's nothing that's like off limits. I don't think my kids will have any memory of depriving, you know?
Well, I love that one, you're not depriving. And two, I love that you're educating. Like, hey, I need to eat this amount of protein because I like to lift weights and I'm going to run tomorrow. So I need extra carbs. So I think it's important to educate our kids. And I appreciate that you do that rather than like, oh, I have to do this to lose weight, because that's when the mental issues happen and that diet culture negativity happens. So I appreciate that you educated. So talking about managing macros, because let's talk about protein. A lot of people struggle with actually getting enough protein. I'm actually one of them. I always have to like get more protein in. What are your recommendations for getting in more protein? And do you have like favorite protein snacks?
My answer is pretty simple here though, because if you don't eat meat, then it's a lot harder. If you don't eat meat and dairy, it's exponentially harder. But I do eat both of those things. And not to push my own book, but this is why my first book is built the way that it is. My first cookbook is based around lean proteins that you prep in bulk and then use throughout the week. And that's because that is just legitimately the way that we eat. And so it was naturally, when I started my account, I was just sharing what I was eating. And eventually that grew into like putting recipes on the blog and eventually cookbooks. And that's how we eat, because that's the easiest way to manipulate your protein, so much that I almost can't identify anymore with what it's like to not be able to hit your protein. I have to scale back. I have to really limit.
You need to help me then, because I cannot get enough in.
You just have to make delicious lean proteins that are in your fridge ready to go. And then it's like, if I was to track my macros diligently, I would track them the night before, and I would see those holes. I would see, oh, I'm 50 grams shy of protein. Well, lucky me, I get to add 50 more grams of chicken to my salad at lunch. I get to eat extra egg whites in the morning or throw in an egg. I get to like add a bunch of extra pulled pork to my sandwich at night. Those are like huge wins to me. I would die to be able to just add excessive amounts of these tasty proteins to my meals. I'm always kind of scaling back because I really love a protein shake at night for dessert too.
Right. I do know that.
So I hit my goal too fast. But I think if you've got tasty proteins prepped, that's the key. You can't go into it thinking you're going to eat like a packaged meal from Trader Joe's and that's going to help you hit your protein goal. Because anytime these foods are all combined for you, you're going to get all this carb and fat along with your protein. So you can't control your protein, because if you want to double the protein, you're also doubling your carbs and fat. So you want to keep your protein lean and separate so you can add it into everything. And then it's so much easier to increase that number, you know?
Okay. Talking about your protein shakes, I do see you make them at night on Instagram. So Tell me your favorite thing to make in your shakes.
That's like this guilty pleasure for me. I feel like, oh, would I feel better if I didn't go to bed with like a full tummy every night? But it's just so important. Have you seen The Family Man?
Yes.
It's like my favorite Christmas movie. And when she's eating the chocolate cake and she's like, it's too important to me. It's like my line. I just feel like it's just too important to me. I just love this big, giant protein shake at night. I mean, it's 1 scoop of protein, but it is big. And I top it like it's like a full ice cream sundae kind of, but I top it with powdered peanut butter and almond milk whipped cream and some cocoa nibs. It's the same every single night. Toasted almonds. And I do weigh these things, not even because I'm tracking so much that like, will it fit or will it won't fit? Just because like, I know exactly the portions for this 400 calorie shake that I love. So I build it on the scale, and every night is 10 grams of cocoa nibs and 10 grams of almonds and a little bit of GTG bar and a little bit of Rice Krispies. It's like the layers just keep growing. But it is so amazing. My husband's hooked on it now too. And it's like shake hour. It's like, is it time yet? And then we sit down and we watch a show, and it's just a precious thing for me.
Well, at least it's got protein in it, and it doesn't sound terrible. It's a good protein shake, and I know you use good protein powders, so
I make sure it's
you're just enjoying. You're just enjoying it.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it really is like, it's so filling. But yeah, when I look at the macros, it's like a 30 carb, 30 protein breakdown, like pretty much how I like all my meals to kind of be broken down, kind of barbells, like lower fat and the carbs and protein kind of match. So, I mean, it's a great breakdown. It's hard for me to want to jump into like an ice cream sundae or something when we're having dessert somewhere, because I just never really love it as much as this shake experience at night. It's very much an experience.
Well, that's great that you found something that you love. So do you have a favorite protein snack, or your protein just comes from all the things that you make from scratch?
My protein comes primarily from foods that I make, probably. I love cottage cheese. That's going to be incorporated in a lot of my snacks just because I love it. So I'm going to get that. And then, I love protein treats. And I feel like I really always want to disclaim this because I don't believe it's the healthiest way to go. I don't think eating bars and shakes is the best way to get your protein in by any means, but I love treats. So for me, if I'm going to want a treat anyway, and I also love these protein treats, it's a good way for me to like scratch that itch, but also get protein instead of just eating a cookie that's going to be all carbs and fat and no protein. I love a protein bar or a protein shake that gives me some protein, and I'm also getting my sweet fix,
So you're going to make sure your treats have some protein in them.
Yeah.
Which we probably all should do.
Yeah.
It's better for your blood sugar levels and things like that anyways.
Right. Balanced. Yeah.
So if someone wants to do macros, then they've got to do a lot of food prepping and making meals from scratch.
I mean, you don't have to. I think it's a lot more enjoyable if you do, so that you have delicious food. I mean, one of the things that's most important to me are yummy homemade sauces, because I just feel like your meal can go from boring to like amazing. And it doesn't need to be always so rich in olive oil and these things that are very calorie dense. That's the thing about macro counting, right? If you've got room for the fats and you want to spend the fats, then wonderful. You can drizzle on a bunch of olive oil or whatever. But if you don't, these homemade, like with a little bit of time, yeah, you could have your fridge stocked with some really tasty things that are going to make your meals really good, so that you're not mourning. You don't feel like you're like deprived just because you're eating healthy, you know?
Okay, so there are a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm just too busy to count macros. Like I can't do that." So for the
Mm-hmm.
busy moms out there, the busy working people, I mean, anyone, what's your suggestion to them? To meal prep?
Um, yeah. Having said that, I've never been a meal prepper where there's actually like those containers in my fridge of prepped meals. It's why I started this, because it was really hard. In the beginning, I remember feeling like, okay, this can't last, because I'm like spending so much time trying to like track ahead on my phone, so much time in my fitness pal, so much time calculating if I wanted to actually make a recipe. I mean, that's why my business grew, because it is really hard. There's a huge learning curve. And if you're not using someone's recipes like mine that are already calculated for you, then you're either spending a lot of time calculating them, or you're eating very basic chicken, vegetables, or a prepackaged meal. That's the worst thing to me, is when you end up eating like packaged food because it's easier to track because you can scan the barcode.
Mm.
That makes me so sad. Like I remember in the beginning, I was more likely to eat In-N-Out when I started counting macros. I never ate it before, but with macros, it was in my fitness pal. I knew how to track it.
Oh,
So I
that's
was like
interesting.
more likely to eat In-N-Out than a salad from a restaurant because I didn't know how to track it.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I know.
But that
So
makes sense for
and
someone
it
that's just starting out.
it can get dangerous if you just order a huge salad at a restaurant. It can be easily the macros of like a double cheeseburger. We all know that now.
So if someone's
So
starting out, how do they track that salad from a restaurant?
yeah, that's like, well, I could go into detail, or just you do your best estimate. For the mental health, I would say you do your best estimate and you just try to be smart. And my biggest tip would just be to keep the very calorie dense things on the side, not because they're bad, just like good fats are good for you, but restaurants are going to put a lot of those fats on your salad, a lot of olive oil in your dressing, a lot of egg if you got a Cobb, a lot of avocado. I mean, your calories on that salad could, be over 1,000 before you know it. If you keep all that on the side and you're able to control your portion and know that you just got one egg in there and you just got maybe a quarter of an avocado, then I would just go through and I would track those pieces individually. I almost would never try to find like Cobb salad in my fitness pal, because that could range. That could be 100 calories. It could be 2,000 calories. It's all about the quantity of the items. So I would just do my best estimate.
And a lot of those apps now have a lot of restaurant items in them
Mm-hmm.
as well, which has made it easier for people.
Right. If you're eating at chain restaurants, you can find a lot of things. Yeah.
Okay, so you have released, like you've talked about, a few macro friendly cookbooks. So tell my listeners about those and where they can find them.
So yes, I have 3 books. The first one is the one I was telling you. It's based around lean protein, like shredded carnitas, or like a shredded Greek pork, some turkey meatballs, some of my favorite grilled chicken, things that are going to taste good later. Because I definitely am not one to eat like a classic leftover out of the fridge for lunch. I would never want that. I want my meals to feel like really fresh. So that book is more how I eat. So I've got the protein prepped in the fridge, and then you can very easily, with the other recipes in the book, build your Greek pork pitas one night, or your pulled pork sandwiches one night, or a rice bowl with the grilled chicken or whatever. So you're going to have all these recipes that you're going to use that protein in. Makes it really easy to manipulate your protein. If you need a lot of protein and less of the rice, but your husband wants a lot of all of it or whatever.
So actually,
Um,
before you tell me about the next cookbook, tell me
mhm.
this. Those recipes, do you make them for yourself and your kids? So
Oh
everybody eats
yeah.
the same thing at dinner time?
Oh, I mean, I want to say absolutely, but if you were in my house, I mean, my boys are very picky. I'm not proud of it. So it's not like they're eating like this, you know, big, amazing Cobb salad with me. They're going to eat the grilled chicken, and they're going to eat some toast and some whatever we've got like out for dinner. They're going to eat bits and pieces of it. Probably my girls are definitely going to eat what we're eating, but I'm not making 2 meals. No, definitely not doing that.
Okay. You're not making your own thing and everybody else a
Mm-mm.
different recipe.
But that book probably makes it, in my opinion, easier because it's so deconstructed because the protein is separate. So it's very easy to do a taco night out of the carnitas, and the boys' tacos can be really simple. And mine and the girls will, and Ross will have all of the mango salsa or whatever, everything on it.
Okay. And then your second book.
My second one was just the little Crunchwrap book. So that's more of like a niche. If you follow me, know that I'm like so obsessed with this Crunchwrap for lunch.
And they look amazing. Let me tell you, when you show
honestly,
them,
they're very
sometimes I'm
amazing.
like, I want one of those right now, but I do not have all of those ingredients right now.
They're amazing. And especially when you count your macros, it's like when you're a shopper and you get something so good for such a good price, you're like, is there something better? I don't know. I don't even care because the value of this, it's like so amazing and it's so good, such good value. And the price is so low. I don't ever need something different. That's how this feels to me. It's like the macros of a light salad. And I love salad. I eat a salad most nights because that's when I love a salad. But sometimes you want to eat with your hands. Is how I am. I want to like hold a big sandwich or something. It's just very satisfying. So anyway, obviously I have strong feelings about it because I made a whole book about them.
That's awesome.
And yeah, just my favorite combination. So that one's much more like nichey and just kind of fun, like buying like a sandwich cookbook, And then the third one is my newest one, probably my most popular one. And it's based around one dish meals. So I've learned, because that is not as much how I cook, but I've learned that for other people, they find it a lot easier because it's just, you're making the whole meal in one casserole dish, one sheet pan, one pot, and it's all calculated, which I will say that was probably the hardest thing for a macro counter is to figure out like, well, I used to love to make chili, but how on earth do I calculate all these ingredients in this chili and figure out what my portion is? I can't cut it into 8 pieces,
Right.
So that's where this is of value to people, especially because when you count your macros, you want to be able to follow a recipe. And then you've got this big pot of chili and you can scoop out 400 grams of it and log my recipe from MyFitnessPal, however much you want in your bowl. And the macros have been calculated.
So you've calculated all the macros for them.
Yes.
That's a really nice tool to have.
Yeah, it is. Honestly, when I started, I remember buying like these healthy cookbooks, but realizing even though these recipes say this is what the nutrition would be, it's very general. And it's like, oh, about a sixth of this is going to be about this, depending on what you use. So I think as a macro counter, you learn like on blog recipes, when they show the nutrition, there's just a lot of margin of error. So it's kind of like when you speak the same language, it's refreshing, like I've definitely like checked every ingredient and it's all there's always going to be margin of error because if you cook your soup longer and more of the liquid evaporates, yours is going to be a tiny bit more calorie dense, but those are all things that we have to be human about and let go. Right.
So that cookbook is family friendly as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I've tasted some of those recipes and they are delicious. So you've done a great job at those recipes.
Thank you.
So are there any other tips or advice that you would give people who are tracking macros or those who want to get started tracking macros?
I mean, I would just say, it's like the really specific things. If it feels so overwhelming and you really want to do it, first evaluate if you really want to do it. If it makes you feel crazy and obsessive and unhappy, those are all signs that you shouldn't do it.
Right.
If it makes you feel excited because you're the kind of person that likes things to be kind of objective instead of emotional, and you appreciate this like Tetris and this science experiment sort of to have data points to figure out what makes you feel best, I think it can be a wonderful tool. And then I think you just have to kind of check yourself. And if it's becoming obsessive, maybe step away, But I do think that once you get over that learning curve and you've really learned how to count your macros, it can be an incredible tool in your arsenal so that you don't ever feel like, oh, what do I need to do? Do I need to stop eating carbs? Do I need to cut out all sugar? Where for me, it's just such a balanced way of living because nothing is off limits. Everything just has value and you know how to swap things out so you still feel good if you decided to eat a giant donut or whatever,
No, that's perfect because there aren't restrictions. There's just boundaries, basically, is
Right.
what it is. And then you get to choose whether you're going to choose the foods with whole food ingredients or not, and how much you're
Right.
going to eat of all of it. So there is a lot of freedom to it, even though the
Yeah.
diet culture doesn't
I
show
will,
that sometimes.
and maybe I'll say one thing that's really important to me. For anybody who has my books or does or uses my recipes, I think they would agree. I use tons of vegetables in my recipes. And I almost feel like macro counting, I've always loved vegetables, but it's kind of shifted the reason why I love vegetables, which I think is helpful. I think so many people see it as like, I need to get my greens in. I need to get my veggies in. Oh, good. I snuck. They're forcing in these vegetables because they're like vitamins, like a medicine,
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's true that they're good for you and you want all those vitamins, I feel like that's like a lost resource. They're so delicious when prepared correctly. And I feel like there's so many amazing recipes out there, but generally when I'm building recipe, I feel like whatever recipe I used to do, it can have 3 times the veggies
Mm-hmm.
and still be so delicious. And what you're left with is, if you didn't care about macros, then wonderful. You have this big bowl of chili and you're getting way more fiber and veggies in there than your classic bowl of chili. If you do care about macros, the beauty is you're getting this giant bowl of chili, and all your macros for that same portion are just going to be better. You're going to have lower carbs because it's going to be probably fewer beans, but a lot of veggies. And so you're still going to have plenty of carbs because of veggies, but you're going to have, just by nature of filling that space with veggies, everything else goes down a little. So your calories are just able to kind of stay the same for a larger portion. And that becomes so important with macro counting, not because we all need to have our calories low, but for people like me who like to eat a lot of food, the answer can't always be just eat less, because we won't always stick to that. So even though it is that simple and we could all just reduce our portions, we don't always want to do that, nor will we stick to that.
Right.
So by nature of shoving tons of veggies into your food, you don't have to reduce your portions necessarily. You can just build it properly so you can be really nice and full and have a delicious, satisfying meal and magically like still hit your goals.
Oh, I love that. So do you count all your vegetables as carbs then? Or are there any free ones?
If I'm counting everything. And I don't
Okay.
feel like that's because I'm obsessive. It's because it's not hard for me. It's like they do have value. It's kind of like saying, I mean, if I'm just going to spend like $1 to pick up a pack of gum, like I don't need to count that in the budget, right? It's like kind of what you said about the sucralose. It adds up. So I'm fully aware that they're very healthy carbs and that some of them are pretty negligible. I'm definitely not going to be weighing my spinach at a restaurant. But if I was logging that salad from the restaurant when I got home later, I would log 150 grams of spinach because I know it's going to account for something.
Good to know. I know listeners would probably just ask that. So, Okay. So tell my listeners where they can find you, where they can find your cookbooks.
I'm on Instagram, Lillie Eats and Tells. And my website is lillieeatsandtells.com. And you can find my cookbooks linked in both of those places.
They have really good recipes, you guys. And I always close my podcast by asking my guests what they have found to be the best ingredient in life.
It seems like such a simple question, but I feel like this is going to sound so cheesy, or I just went in circles. Like, is there something more interesting? But I just feel like kindness. I feel like it's just an underrated quality. I think like we're so focused sometimes on being like more powerful or more confident or, advocating for ourselves, and so many things that are very important, but sometimes at the expense of kindness. And I think if we focused on that, it just, the results are better for everybody.
I love that. And it's simple, but it's so true, because just last night I got a really rude DM, and you probably know this with Instagram. It's just the territory that comes with being on Instagram. But I got a really rude DM, and I said to my husband, why can't we just all be kind? That's it. Like if this world, if we all were just kind and made that a priority, this world would be a completely different place. So I appreciate you saying that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lillie, for being here. I know my listeners learned a lot about macros, and thank you again for taking time to be here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Carlin. I'm honored.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.